I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. Leading a hybrid team. That's the focus of today's episode, and it is a relatively new phenomenon for leaders. In very recent memory, people worked at the office. They were on site, and that was the norm. Occasionally, people had some flexibility or some autonomy over an element of remote working. You would occasionally hear of people perhaps having the odd day here and there, but the world has changed, things have shifted, and we are now in an environment where hybrid working, so some people office-based and some people remote working, is increasingly common. Now, I'm not here to argue the pros and cons on this episode of on-site versus off-site work. That's for a discussion for another day. This is about how, as a leader, do you ensure you get the best out of a hybrid team? When some of your staff are remote working, some of them are on site, how do you lead them? And today I'm going to provide 5 tips that, in my experience, I believe are essential for every leader to ensure they get the very best out of their team and keep the organization moving forward when utilizing a hybrid setup. Number 1, foster inclusive communication. Now, if you've listened to previous episodes or worked with me in any capacity, you know how passionate I am about the importance of communication. When it's handled well by the leader, when he role models the best practice, then he or she will get the best out of their team. And equally, when it's handled badly, then you can decimate culture, resilience, and ultimately performance. It's even more important when you're talking about a hybrid situation. It is so essential for people to feel included. And that takes discipline from the leader. If you're on site, you're in the office, it's so much easier to connect and collaborate and stay close to those people who are around you. And it takes a discipline to think about the systems and the processes needed to ensure that everybody has a voice, that everybody can contribute to the strategy, to assessing performance and tweaking and enhancing strategy as you move forward. So naturally, technology plays a key role, and we're all familiar now with Zoom and team calls, and there's other systems beyond just basic emails, Slack, etc., that can ensure there's elements of formal and informal communication. And there's no right and wrong way of how to utilize those, but I think to wrap up this particular point, it really falls upon the leader to ensure that everybody's in the loop. You know, the previous all hands meetings are easy. You call a meeting, you bring the key people together into a meeting room, and you deliver, you discuss, you move on. That doesn't exist in many cases now. So how do you ensure that everybody is on the same page, everybody has clarity, everybody is fully up to speed? So ensuring that you are fostering that collaboration is an essential first step, the foundational step, if you will, of leading a hybrid team. Number 2, sustain a vibrant culture. We've talked recently about how you build culture. We've talked about the destroyers of culture. And I think there's a heightened level of pressure on leaders now to maintain and sustain a vibrant culture when not everybody's on site. Now, this isn't always practically possible. You may have remote workers in different countries scattered around the world, but I do believe that periodically the old-fashioned way is still the best way. You have to get your team together at some point. I think it's essential to foster those first impressions, those introductions, to allow virtual collaboration in the future. Now, I'm not insisting on you bringing the team together every week and all the associated logistical and cost implications that come with it. But I do think there's a need to try and get people together face to face at some point, even if that's just a part of the onboarding process, and then perhaps at some sort of annual event, team building exercise, etc. Now, it goes without saying that the technology we now have does enable connectivity. face-to-face is not the only way. So there needs to be thought and consideration given to how you can connect and encourage collaboration, and also the development of relationships. So it's not just log on, log off, formal discussion. How do you find those opportunities for those softer conversations that build friendships and allegiances and professional collaboration opportunities? Those sort of things happen organically in a face-to-face environment. So you do need to bring people together, ideally face-to-face at some stage, but regularly in both that sort of professional and almost semi-social capacity. Now, I know it might sound like I'm talking in riddles. I'm not advocating people are coming on in the style that happened in lockdown and doing quizzes, etc. But I think you get the point. How do you ensure that people feel connected? I think what's also really important from a cultural perspective is maintaining standards. We talked a lot about that talk is cheap, actions speak louder than words. When you're the leader of an organization, you are trying to embed certain behaviors, certain traits that you believe will drive the organization forward. So it's equally important that you're doing that with people that are remote and also alongside the people that are in the office. So how do you set and maintain standards and hold people to account when they're working virtually? It's the same principles. It just takes a bit more discipline and thought to be able to do that. I think it's essential to celebrate and share success. For me, that's a big part of developing a vibrant culture in any organization. You're not there as a leader to constantly critique and identify failings and problems and lambast people for making mistakes. Yes, you have to have standards and hold people accountable, but it's also hugely important to give credit where credit's due, to celebrate team members when they have achieved something, and to let people know. And it's particularly important in this hybrid environment, because when you're all on site, often it's very easy to identify what your co-workers are doing and who's achieving what and where. When elements of the workforce are remote, then I think it's much more beholden on the leader to ensure that she is identifying some of these successes and sharing them. It comes back to our earlier point about ensuring that there's inclusive communication, that everybody's on the same page. That's not just about strategy. For me, it's also about celebrating and sharing individual and team success with the wider organization. Flexibility with clarity and accountability. Obviously, one of the big benefits of a hybrid system is flexibility. You get to access a wider talent pool. You get to get people perhaps in different countries, different time zones. So you have to have flexibility. But fundamentally, and this ties back into the previous point about culture, people still need clarity and they still need to be held to account. So clarity about what? Well, in particular, roles and responsibilities. People need to understand from an individual perspective what is expected of me. What is my role? What am I responsible for? What am I being held accountable for? And equally, that then needs to permeate around the wider organization. People need to understand how they interact with other team members, where their roles and responsibilities start and finish. And it's imperative that that also ties in with remote workers. So if you're creating flexibility for certain people, they're working different hours, their obligations are different to the on-site workers, then I know I'm stating the obvious, but your on-site workers need to understand that. Otherwise, there's friction points when they're reaching out, contacting staff, expecting them to be available at certain times when they're not. So it's a very simple thing to get right, but all too often I see it neglected. Make sure everybody understands their personal role, everybody understands the wider team dynamic, everybody understands what flexibility people have got, who is accountable for what, and how it ties in to the bigger picture that you're trying to achieve. And I think the word accountability is essential here, because yes, we will be giving people greater degrees of flexibility. Some remote workers, because they're working independently, will like to work late at night or early in the morning. But invariably they will be part of a bigger picture. So it is essential that the leader is very clear in giving the clarity of what are the timelines, who is delivering what and when is their work required by. Because without that level of accountability, then it becomes a mess. There's all levels of ambiguity. Teams get frustrated. On-site teams can start to resent off-site teams. So from the outset, it's important that roles and responsibilities are clear. Everybody's got clarity on the timelines. Everybody knows what they're being accountable for. And then the leader has to ensure they're held accountable to meet what has been agreed. And that ties again, very simply, back into the culture. If you have people treated on different levels with different standards, then the culture very quickly starts to fall apart. Number 4, outcome, not hours. Now, even without talking about hybrid situations, this has been something that gets me on my proverbial soapbox regularly. Presenteeism should be made redundant. It is such an antiquated failing of leadership. Yes, in the Victorian era, when the majority of people were working in factories, you had to punch in and punch out. You had to be on deck. You had to be in the factory. You had a role in the production line. And if you weren't there, things couldn't happen. But times have changed. And yes, there are still elements of manufacturing where that is required. But in the vast majority of situations, flexibility can be allowed. And if flexibility can be allowed, we need to move our mindset to judging outcomes, not hours served. And this is particularly relevant with regard to remote working. A lot of leaders, I find, have tied themselves in knots in recent years, worrying and agonizing about, are remote workers taking advantage? Are they really working, or are they sitting at home watching daytime television, having a cup of coffee in the garden, going to the gym, etc., etc.? Well, that to me isn't really a concern. That's no different in the old-fashioned model of somebody being present at the desk, but they're not really engaged with the work. Maybe they're surfing the internet, maybe they're chatting to somebody on the phone. They're physically present, but they are not mentally present on the task in hand. So it's not about hours served, whether you're working remotely or on site. For me, every bit of performance should be delivered and judged rather on outcomes. If somebody can do the work in half the time, but they hit the standard and they deliver with excellence, then don't sweat how the time is being managed. If somebody on the flip side is there every hour you can possibly imagine, working 18-hour days, and they never leave the office, they sleep under the desk, but they can't deliver, that's much more of a concern. So I think take the pressure off yourself as a leader. Don't worry about hours worked. Worry about, are they doing the job? Are they meeting the standards that you have outlined? You've given them clarity on their roles and responsibilities and what they're being held accountable for. And if they're delivering, then take your energy and your bandwidth to some other challenge. Don't worry about whether they are at their desk 24/7, because perhaps they don't need to be to deliver at the level of excellence that you require. Number 5, watch well-being of your team. Now, this might sound it's a bit of a contradiction to my previous point. In my previous point, I was advocating a light touch. You don't need to micromanage staff, particularly your remote staff. Judge them on what they deliver, not on the hours they are at their desk. Now, it might sound at first glance like a contradiction, but it certainly isn't. What I have witnessed and am very, very aware of with the clients I've worked with is that remote workers find that all the previously established boundaries have been blurred. Boundaries between home and work, boundaries between personal life and professional life. And there is a real risk of them working at too intense a level without appropriate breaks. That's one of the initial concerns, because previously they would have periods for decompression, a commute to work, a commute home from work. They might have travel between meetings, even just getting up from their desk and walking to meeting rooms or down to reception or to the cafe for lunch. They all break up the day and reduce the amount of time at the screen. As I'm sure we've all experienced with remote working, there is a danger you go from one virtual meeting to the next, to the next, to the next, on the hour, every hour. And as soon as you finish your meetings, you're back onto your emails, you eat at your desk, and you end up working at a far higher intensity, which simply isn't sustainable. And we've got to guard against that as leaders. We need to check in regularly with our remote staff. It's no different to walking around the office and noticing that somebody's always the first in, last to leave, working through the lunch. That needs an arm around the shoulder from the leader to ask them, is everything okay? How are they managing? Because those sort of behaviors can't be ignored. They are the red flags towards burnout. And I think remote workers are far more at risk. I think what's also a really important area to guard against is not just the damage to their potential performance through burnout, but also the damage to people's well-being and mental health. So we're a species that predominantly like to be around other human beings. Now, there are some exceptions where some people are absolutely happy to sit with a computer, a spreadsheet, and not have any human interaction. That does exist, but it's the minority. I think most people enjoy periods of calm, tranquility, where they can work at a deep level of concentration and get things done, but then equally also need human interaction. And those elements of human interaction may have been bumping into somebody when you're making a coffee, bumping into different staff from different departments when you're at the kitchen or the cafe within your office environment. Those impromptu conversations might not have been about work necessarily, although invariably often they will be, but they're about human connection. They're about showing interest in other people and breaking up the day. And that lack of human connection can really impact people. And I've worked with a number of people who have actually stepped away from remote working, whilst it works for them from a family dynamic point of view, from a logistical, travel, all these areas it works, but the simple lack of human connection made it unsustainable. And they've had to reconsider all those other elements, where they live, how close they are to the office, etc., to enable them to get back into some element of hybrid working as opposed to remote working. So it's a long point to finish with, but just because people are happy that they're working remotely, and as I've said, logistically, often that is the case, it ties in with their childcare needs or it ties in with their geographical location, you must still check in as a leader and make sure they're doing okay from a mental health capacity point of view. And again, whilst it's not perfect, when there is that lack of connection, that's where you have to step up as a leader and perhaps touch base a bit more regularly from your perspective, but also foster other opportunities for that individual to be able to collaborate more regularly with team members. 5 seemingly simple points. Keep that inclusive communication working. Foster that vibrant culture. Hold people to the same standards, whether they're working remotely or on site. Hold people accountable, but give them clarity. Yes, have flexibility. Don't worry about hours served, worry about outcomes, and make sure you use technology to your advantage, and particularly from a connectivity point of view, to ensure that your staff can continue to perform at the highest level, but also that their mental health is protected and not damaged from the isolation and loneliness that remote working can bring. So I hope these have been helpful. As with every episode, I always encourage feedback, and I'm really enjoying the interaction that many of the listeners now have, particularly through LinkedIn and direct messaging. So please do continue to do that. And if there's topics and areas that you think we should cover in future podcasts, then please do let me know. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.